Welcome to Heresy, the Horus Heresy talk show. In this video, we're going to be talking about all of the Questoris Knight units in the new Liber Mechanicum book. We're going to be taking a look at the basic Knight rules, so you've got them in your head as we're looking at the units. All of the Knight units themselves, what they're equipped with, what they're good at and what they're bad at, and then also briefly some tactics as to how you can use these Knights on the battlefield as well. But before we do that, if you enjoy the content, please do leave me a like and a subscribe on YouTube. Leave me any feedback you've got in the comments down below. And don't forget to join us on Heresy Discord. A link to that is in the video description as well. And now, on with the show. So first of all, a quick recap for Knight rules. So they don't get to do reactions versus anything except other super heavies, Knights and Titans, or models with 8 wounds. So generally, for the most part, you won't be reacting against anything, which is definitely a disadvantage in most games. You do get to ignore terrain when moving, which is good because they've got a very big base, and you ignore the vehicle damage table as well. So basically you just take hull points worth of damage, but if someone does get an explode result, you take an extra d3, which is quite a lot. You do always explode on death with a fairly significant high strength large explosion, although only AP 4. You can't be locked in combat either, which is very good, but you do lock enemies in combat, so you can charge into battle, tie someone up, they might not be able to hurt you really very much, which is good. And then in your turn, you can move away, tie something else up, maybe you shoot that unit, etc. So that's quite a cool thing to be able to do. You also get stomp attacks, so you get your attacks plus D3, so about sort of 5 or 6 extra attacks with a strength equal to the Knight and AP 2 at initiative 1, which pumps up the melee ability quite a bit and is actually better than most of the melee weapons in a lot of ways as well. When you are in melee, you use your front armor. You can't sweep or consolidate, but you have got armor 13 or 14 in melee, which normally means you're going to be immune or pseudo-immune to a lot of weapons that aren't specialist at destroying vehicles, although you do have to still watch out for them Thunderhammers with enough attacks. They will do damage to you too. Most of these Knights have got a lot of stats in common, so they're generally armor 13, 12, 12 with about 7 hit points. They've all got an ion shield, which is 4++ invulnerable versus frontal shooting, a 5 in the side, but nothing in the rear, so you really want to make sure you keep the enemy's big guns in your front. And they generally move about 10 to 14 inches, weapon skill and ballistic skill 4, initiative 3 or 4, attacks 3 or 4. That's roughly what the profiles look like. The first Knight we're going to look at is the Knight Questoris, so the classic Knight, the most customizable Knight with the most options, and the one that GW do in a plastic kit. We'll just have a look at their weapon options. So they come with the Reaper Chainsword by default, which is Strength 10, AP 2 Shred. Notably, like most things in Knights, lacks Brutal, which generally makes it feel pretty weak compared to other things that are out there, Dreadnoughts particularly, but also just even compared to a Thunderhammer hitting something really. And because most of these Knights have got weapon skill 4 and 3 or 4 attacks, this weapon's got kind of limited effectiveness, really, as well. Given that you're spending 400 points on this model, it doesn't really have much output, even though the weapon is quite strong. You've also got the Thunderstrike Gauntlet option, which I think is the coolest looking option. Now, it's Strength 12, AP 2, but it's got Sunder, not Shred, which means that, it's better against vehicles, but it's worse against everything else. As much as these weapons are lacking Brutal, this weapon in particular, Giant Super Power Fist not being Brutal, really confuses me. I don't know how this weapon could possibly not be Brutal, but there you go. It's got the same drawbacks as the Reaper Chainsword. Ultimately, it's just worse than the Reaper Chainsword. It's only a 5-point upgrade, but you would rather have Shred versus most targets the great majority of the time. And Strength 10 is enough to penetrate most vehicles in melee anyway. You've got your Strength 10, you've got your Stomps on top of that as well. You're not really worried about vehicles in melee with this. You would rather be better against things like Dreadnoughts or clearing enemy troops off you if they get into combat and that kind of thing. So really, if you're going to take a melee weapon, you're better sticking with the Reaper Chainsword and not paying points for the upgrade. That's not really an upgrade. The default gun is the Rapid Fire Battle Cannon, so it's Ordnance 2 with a 5-inch blast, Strength 8, AP 4. Now the AP on that is obviously disappointing, but throwing out 2 5-inch blasts at Strength 8 is potentially quite a lot of damage, and these are all going to be instant death versus most things like Space Marines as well, so not a bad gun, given that it's free. You know, like most knight weapons, it's a little bit on the disappointing side, firepower-wise, but compared to the other things that you can use, it's not a terrible weapon. It's okay. For 10 points, you can upgrade that to an Avenger Gatling Cannon. So this is heavy 12, rend and 6 with a 36-inch range. So it's basically 2 assault cannons strapped together with a slightly longer range. So again, that's a pretty good gun, but not spectacular for something that you pay so many points for a knight this big. Does come with a free heavy flamer as well, which is, you know, fine. It's an okay gun, actually. You know, if you're going to shoot at maybe light armor, or you just want to shoot some Space Marines or whatever, it's going to do a little bit of work. It's just disappointing for a knight. Now, notably, the Avenger Gatling Cannon is the only ranged weapon that can replace the Reaper Chainsword if you want to use a double gun knight. And in that case, it costs 15 points, which is a bit more expensive, but is worth it because their melee weapons are so weak. If you're going to do a shooty knight, you're going to pay 300 points for the basic version of the knight. You might as well add one of these on. There's also the Las Impulsor, which is like a cutting weapon. So it's heavy 2 Sunder, instant death, range 12, and it's strength 10 AP2. Basically a short range 2-shot las cannon. Again, not terrible if you're going to get into that range, but the problem for knights is as they get closer, it's much easier to flank them and ignore their ion shield, at which point they lose a lot of their survivability, which isn't great. And like all cutting weapons, it's got a melee profile, but the cumbersome rule is just so bad. One attack only hits on a 6. If you do hit with it, you know, it's got as good a chance as any of killing something, but, you know, you could easily just have another weapon. It's not really very good. So overall, this option is, I would say, not very good. It's also the most expensive upgrade as well, just because of the range limitation. The gun's okay, but the range is a bit too limited. The best weapon, though, is the thermal cannon. Now, this is actually good. This is a 36-inch range melter gun with a large blast. Now, because it's got a large blast and because it's got AP1 strength 8, it's excellent for killing Space Marines. It's excellent for killing Terminators as well, because it'll instant death them if they fail their invulnerable save. Just generally a good gun. Only getting one shot versus vehicles isn't great for its cost, because you're obviously paying a big expensive knight to have one shot, but armor baying out to 18 inches is quite a long way. So, you know, you can shoot this at big vehicles and potentially blow them up, or, you know, easily do a wound to a dreadnought fairly easily, I suppose, at least, or especially if the dreadnought's near other things and the template might hit multiple stuff. This is a good gun, easily the best gun on the knight, and only a 5-point upgrade. So definitely worth taking. And, you know, if I was going to run a knight, I would take this because it's the only gun that's not a little bit disappointing. We've got some carapace weapon options as well. Now, remember, these can't shoot things that are within 12 inches of the knight because they can't aim down very well. So you got the twin-linked Icarus autocannon, which is just a twin-linked autocannon with Skyfire. That's all there is. So strength 7, rend and 6, 2 shots. The problem with it is it's got Skyfire, which is great, but most flyers are armor 12, so you still need a 5 to glance them or a 6 to penetrate them. The rending's not really helping you because you've got to pen flyers on a 6 anyway, and it's only 2 shots. So whilst you will probably hit with both of them most of the time, a lot of the time you won't even get one glance. So as an anti-aircraft weapon, it's not very good. And if you're not shooting aircraft, which is most games, it's also not going to do a lot. And it's 20 points, really expensive. So, you know, something I would definitely avoid, unfortunately. Iron Storm Missile Pod, similarly, 25 points this upgrade. And it's a strength 5 AP4, 5-inch blast. It's like a big Havoc launcher. Very, very expensive, horribly overpriced for what it does. Also not worth putting on the back of the knight either. The only one that is worth using is the Storm Spear rocket pod, so it gives you 3 strength 8 AP3 missiles, and obviously knights can split fire however they want, so that's good at, you know, shooting up a couple of marines, maybe enemy marines with heavy weapons. You know, it's good at shooting at light vehicles, only AP3 brick can pen them, etc. So there's a bunch of uses for this. 25 points is still fairly pricey, but for what it does isn't too bad, but it's relevant firepower, and your expensive knight that can split fire easily and that kind of stuff, it is worth considering. And I would probably try to use this most of the time just to give your knight a bit more firepower. So Knights Questoris overall, as with most knights, quite expensive with a limited choice of genuinely good or even usable weapons. They've just got so many bad weapon options, really. The Thermal Cannon plus the Reaper Chainsword, or the Thermal Cannon plus an Avenger Gatling Cannon, is the only really build that stands out for me, where I look at it and I think, yeah, I put one of these on the tabletop. Everything else you would feel like you were, you know, not having much impact on the battlefield, and generally I think be a bit disappointing, whether you're playing for you know, to win or just playing for fun. You don't want your big cool model not to do a lot. I do like the Stormspear rocket pod, particularly on the double gun version of this. If you're going to be sitting back and shooting, you might as well have more firepower. You might as well take the melter gun probably most of the time for 5 points. You might as well have another powerful shot for 5 points on such a big, tough platform. Ultimately, again, as with most knights, its poor offensive potential lets it down, even though it's pretty tough for what it is. But they are usable, you know. They're not great. They're not super exciting. In a lot of ways, it's probably good, because when knights are too good, they're just not very fun to play against. So in some ways, it's good that the only reason you would put one of these on the table is more for fun than serious reasons. They're definitely usable. If you want to field one for cool factor, whilst I would stay with the Gatling cannon and the thermal cannon and maybe the rocket pod on top, you can definitely get use out of them on the tabletop, but probably not if you're playing in a more competitive environment. Onto the Knight Lancer. So Knight Lancer's pretty cool. Moves 14 inches and it's got flank speed, which means that it can go 18 and still charge, or it can go 14, shoot one target and charge another, which is pretty cool. Means you're going to get into combat very fast, probably turn 1 if you want to be in combat most games. Now, it's only got a 5+ invulnerable save, unlike other knights, but it does keep that invulnerable save in melee because it's on a shield. The Shockland shooting's not bad. 6 shots, strength 7, AP 3, concussive 2, means you can take a few pot shots at maybe high value Space Marines like heavy support squads, and then maybe charge a different target. Or if you are going to charge something else, you can shoot it at wherever you're going to charge and try and concuss it if you want to. Now, the Shockland's melee is at AP, at initiative 5, because it's got reach 1, strength 10, AP 2. So, you know, powerful weapon by normal standards, but again, no brutal, not even brutal 2. Not even brutal when you charge on the turn you charge, you know, classic Lance rules, anything like that. Just a bit of a letdown, really, you know, given the knight's cost. Just a lack of damage in melee, but it can tie up units very fast, and if you're going to try and use this knight, that's probably what I would see as its main reason to exist, is to try and charge into something, you know, especially if you're playing against enemy shooting armies, just charge into something and tie it up. And then maybe next turn hop into something else and tie that up, or try and multi-charge 2 units and tie them up. You can really do a lot with this. And although it's got, you know, the standard weakness of being hit by high-strength weapons in combat, it does keep its invulnerable save against things like Thunderhammers. So, pretty cool. Not a super incredible, amazing unit, the Knight Lancer, but definitely usable. You can definitely do stuff with it. And if you've got one or you like the model, you can find uses for it in your army. The Knight Castigator is the next one. So again, this has also got, you know, move 14 and flank speed, so it's pretty fast, pretty flexible. The Tempest Warblade it's got, now this is a very powerful weapon, potentially. It auto hits every enemy in base contact at initiative 2, and it's strength 10, AP 2, Deflagrate. So auto hitting is obviously powerful in the first place, since very few things in a game, regardless of weapon skill, will ever hit on a 3, and most will hit on a 4. So this is like having, you know, lots and lots of attacks, and they're auto hitting with high strength and AP, and Deflagrate for the things, you know, that you do go through. The problem with it is getting things in base-to-base contact is actually harder than it looks to get lots and lots of enemies. In your head, this is going to get in base-to-base with like 10 models and then kill them all, but that's probably not going to happen, especially if your opponent positions his unit to stop it. You know, if you imagine if your opponent sort of zigzags the models, so you can only touch the front rank, and then your base is curved, so you're not going to be able to get like everything in a straight line in contact. And what you'll actually find out is a lot of the time with the way you position this, unless your opponent doesn't really see it coming, you're probably only going to get 2 or 3 models with it. Now, you are going to hit all them 2 or 3 models with some big attacks though, which is kind of cool. So I do like this. It has got potential. Its Castigator bolt cannon's also very good. So it's heavy 18, pinning, shell shock 1, and it's twin linked. It's a twin-linked Castigator bolt cannon, which itself already has twin-linked, so great writing there, Mechanicum book. But anyway, heavy 18, pin and shell shock, strength 6, so it's going to wound on a 2. The volume of fire out of this, you're going to hit with 16 of these on average, wounded on 2s, which means you're going to get 13 or 14 saves onto most Marine units. So you're going to kill sort of 4 or 5 power armor Marines a lot of the time, you know, or at least, you know, 1 Terminator, and force them to take a pin and check with -1. So that's pretty cool as weapons go. If you've played against a Sakaran Punisher, you'll know that's a pretty decent profile. And, you know, I think, you know, you take a decent pin and machine gun and a decent melee weapon, as well, you know, plus stomps on top of the Tempest Warblade too. This is actually a pretty good knight, and it's only 380 points as well. It's mostly good at killing infantry ranged or light vehicles ranged with the Castigator bolt cannon as well, just because of the volume of shots. Or elite infantry and melee is also a cool thing. Is this the role that you want a knight to play? Well, you know, if you arrange the rest of your army so they're better at killing the heavier targets, and this can kill the lighter ones and then tie stuff up in melee and stuff as well, this is actually a pretty good knight, and I would hazard this is probably the best knight in the entire book at its role, I think. So if you like the model or you've got one, again, or you want to pick up a knight but you haven't decided which one, this is probably the one I'd go for because it's actually pretty decent. Next we got the Knight Acheron. I haven't got a lot to say about this knight really, unfortunately. Again, move 14 and flank speed, which is good. It's got a Reaper Chain Fist, so it basically exchanges the Shred for Sunder instead, which actually makes it a worse Reaper Chainsword, in my opinion, because again, the things you really want rerolls against are things like Dreadnoughts or infantry to make sure that you wound them and force them to take that instant death save, whereas killing vehicles is not the biggest thing in the world. And, you know, there's lots of armor bane in this army, or even within knights, they've got access to things that are armor bane. This is only Sunder, which is even worse. So it's actually just not a very good weapon at all. It's, you know, it's worse than the Reaper Chainsword, which already isn't very good. The Acheron Flamestorm Cannon Hellstorm templates are super cool. Very, very big. Can hit a lot of stuff with them in theory, although most of the time you'll just be covering one unit, maybe clipping another. But it's only strength 7, so it does an instant death. It's only AP 4, so everything will get a save. And there's so many things in the game with heavy as well. Most of the time things will get a rerollable save. So you're never going to hurt Terminators with this. You're not going to do a lot against heavy Space Marines either. You're going to kill maybe, you know, one guy in a unit of 10 if you overlap a unit of 10. Even things that aren't heavy, you're probably only going to kill a couple of Space Marines because of the AP. It's just not really a very good weapon. And for a knight that costs 415 points, weak melee weapon, weak gun, this is just not a good knight at all. Unfortunately, it's just really, really poor. And this is definitely one I would avoid using, again, unless you've already got the model or you're in love with it or something like that, in which case you can put it on the table, but I would hazard it's probably going to disappoint you quite a lot in its performance. The Questoris Knight Porphyrion is one of the big chunky knights, the super knights, if you will. So this is armor 14 on the front, which is strong. 9 hit points, so a couple of extra compared to a normal knight, and it's got It Will Not Die 6, which is not very good, but may occasionally give you an extra hit point before you die. The biggest thing in this is it's got 2 twin-linked Magna las cannons, and each one of those is 2 shots as well, which is just a crazy amount of firepower. These are strength 10, AP 2. It's an ordnance weapon, so you're getting to, you know, roll twice, pick the highest for AP as well. And they've got a 5-inch blast. Now, that is just amazing at killing everything. It's 4 shots, which means it's going to be pretty good at killing vehicles, although for 625 points, maybe not the best vehicle killing firepower, but it just clears infantry. You know, maybe counterintuitively for a las cannon, but those big infantry killing shots is really powerful, you know, even against things like Terminators as well. It's got 2 auto cannons, which you can upgrade to 2 more las cannons for 10 points each. If you're paying 625 points, you might as well have another 2 las cannons for 20 more points, so I would go with that too. It's got an Ironstorm missile pod, which, as we said before, is a pretty weak weapon, but you can upgrade it to a Whirlwind Hyperios missile launcher, which is just a good anti-aircraft weapon. Strength 8, multiple shots. It can split fire because it's a knight anyway, so you can shoot at air units with that. That's pretty cool. It's also got the catastrophic explosion rules, which means that when it explodes, it's going to have AP enough to go through marine armor as well. So, you know, if it is going to die or is getting close, you can suicide it into things for a bigger explosion. Ultimately, a very expensive model, and although it brings some overwhelming firepower to the battlefield, particularly in the sort of marine killing area, but also good at killing lots of other things as well with its 6 las cannon shots, it is good, and you will definitely find uses for it. It is horrendously expensive, though. So, certainly good. You will certainly get uses out of it. It won't win you games, and I don't think it's going to be too terrible to play against either, just because it might be very tough to kill. It's not like it's killing everything on the board. You know, if you've got Space Marines with heavy weapon squads, you probably want to hide them from it, ideally. But, you know, I think it's, you know, powerful, but you do really pay for it. I'll just briefly mention the Mechanicum-Questoris Knights, so the Styrex and the Megara, and also the, you know, the Porphyrions, other large companion, the Asterius with the conversion beamers as well. Now, these are basically the same as the Mechanicum versions, and if you want to hear a review of them, you can check my Mechanicum Knights review. These are a little bit cheaper, but the Lose It Will Not Die on the flare shield that the Mechanicum ones have, which makes them a bit to quite a lot worse than the Mechanicum ones. So if you're running a Mechanicum army and you want to use those, you should definitely use the Mechanicum versions. If you're running another army, you'd probably be better sticking with the Questoris Knight options, which are a bit better than these Mechanicum ones. So how do you use these Knights on the battlefield? Well, Knights pay a lot of points to be tough. You know, AV 13 or 14 on a 4+ is pretty hard to kill. That advantage does go quite quickly though, in your side armor and particularly your rear armor. So you need to keep the enemy in your front and at range ideally. At least in the early game, you know, after which point later on you can go and close, maybe tie stuff up in melee and stomp it, that kind of stuff. Knight guns are generally not amazing for the cost either, but at least on the Questoris side of things, there are some that are pretty good. The thermal cannon's a good weapon, the Castigator bolt cannon's a good weapon, and the Porphyrion, although it's very expensive, has got Magna Las cannons that are very good as well. To get value from your Knights, though, they probably are going to have to be a melee at some point. So even though they're not super good for that, due to their stats and, you know, their weapons not being amazing, you're mostly going to be tying stuff up for value with your Knights. So later on in the game, you can maybe go and stop something moving around getting onto an objective, or you can maybe go and tie up an elite melee unit to stop it killing your other troops or something like that. That's one of the ways you do get extra value from your Knights, other than just shooting things. All those things taken together mean it's difficult to get real value from Knights because they're so expensive, unless your opponent wastes time shooting them. But they do have some guns, they do have some applications, and it is, you know, quite skill intensive and maybe a challenge worth taking upon yourself. So in summary, some of the shooting Knights are good enough in their role to be worth taking, particularly with some of the weapons I've just mentioned. Although many of the shooting Knights just aren't efficient enough. Their guns are just too weak for their points. And the melee is too weak for their points as well. You know, it's just limited. That lack of brutal really hurts them. Their vulnerability at close range really hurts them too. And, you know, on top of those things as well, most missions, at least book missions, will give people bonus VPs for killing Lord of Wars. So as well as being fairly weak units, you're also giving your opponent free points. Ultimately, Knights aren't quite so much bad. So, well, some of them are bad actually, but generally they're not so much bad as just disappointing in their impact on the battlefield. They probably could have stood to have slightly better weapons and certainly brutal on the melee to make them have a little bit more impact. You can definitely find uses for Knights in your armies. They certainly can perform a role, and they do need to be played with skill, you know, which is a challenge, which might be fun for you, and particularly if you're not playing to try and be super competitive. You know, they do look cool on the battlefield. They are great models, and it is worth, you know, trying to get some use out of them, particularly as a one-of, backing up your other armies as well. So that's the end of the show. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please leave me a like and subscribe on YouTube, and don't forget to leave me any comments down below, and do join us on Discord and the Heresy Discord community. A link to that is in the video description. I'll see you all soon, guys. Bye-bye.